My ex's sister abandoned her baby to us. Then my ex left too, leaving me to raise a kid who wasn't mine alone. She came back 10 years with the goal of kidnapping my son. When he turned her down, she turned our community against me. Fast forward to now, I'm enjoying watching her lose everything. I was 18 when I became a single father to a kid who wasn't mine. My girlfriend Jane and I had just graduated high school when her older sister Lisa came to us sobbing about fertility struggles. She'd spent 3 years trying to conceive and was desperate. She begged us to surrogate since we were young and healthy. I was reluctant, but eventually agreed because Jane seemed okay with it, and I loved her and wanted to support her family. Everything went smoothly at first, until Jane was 8 months pregnant with Lisa's baby. That's when Lisa showed up at our apartment and announced she'd gotten a promotion that required moving to Europe. She said she couldn't handle the baby with this job opportunity and wanted us to keep it since we'd grown attached anyway. Jane completely lost it. She started screaming at Lisa about how this wasn't the plan and how she wasn't ready to be a mother at 18, but Lisa didn't care. She just up and left the country. Jane gave birth a month later and we took the baby home. My parents were never in the picture, and Jane's parents claimed they were too exhausted to help, and so all the work was left to us. Needless to say, it was an absolute nightmare. We had travel plans, job opportunities, all things we're giving up to raise this little boy. At least I thought we were giving these up. It became clear very quickly that Jane couldn't handle the baby. She yelled at him a lot, and over time started making these jokes about disappearing like her sister. Well, these jokes turned out to be true. One morning I woke up to feed little Thomas and found a note on the kitchen counter. Jane wrote that she needed to find herself and couldn't do this anymore. She was gone. I tried to call her, but she had already deactivated her number. And so, for the next 10 years, I gave Thomas all I had. I didn't go to college. I began working 2 jobs and spent every ounce of my free time being the best dad I could. My own dad was never around, and I didn't want to repeat his mistakes. It wasn't much, but Thomas loved it. Fast forward 10 years, Thomas called me dad without thinking twice. He knew his history, but it didn't matter to him. As far as he was concerned, I was dad. Well, that's when Lisa showed up at Thomas's school during pickup. First time in 10 years. She was wearing designer clothes and driving a Mercedes. Apparently, she'd married some tech executive and decided she wanted to play mommy now that the hard part was over. I remember Thomas hid behind my leg when she tried to walk over to him. He whispered, "Dad, who is that lady?" And my heart broke. Lisa's face turned red, and she started making a scene right there in the parking lot. "I'm your mother," she kept saying, while Thomas pressed his face into my jeans. Other parents were starting to stare. I picked Thomas up and carried him to our car, while Lisa followed us screaming about her rights. That night, she blew up my phone with texts demanding to see her son. I reminded her about the legal documents she'd signed, giving up her parental rights. She said her new husband's lawyer would overturn those papers. The next week, she started showing up everywhere, at the grocery store, at the park during baseball practice. She'd take photos from a distance and post them on Facebook with captions like, "Watching my baby boy from afar because his kidnapper won't let me near him." Then she escalated. She started telling other parents at school that something was off about a young single man being so obsessed with raising someone else's child. She'd corner moms at pickup and whisper about how it wasn't natural for a man to want to raise a boy alone. One day, I was helping Thomas with his homework at the kitchen table when there was a knock at the door. 2 CPS workers stood there with stern expressions. They said they'd received a report about inappropriate conduct with a minor in the home. My hands started shaking as they explained that someone had accused me of being a predator. They needed to interview Thomas separately and inspect our home immediately. Thomas must have sensed my panic because he started crying and wrapped his arms around my waist, begging them not to take him away. The next 3 hours were hell. They interviewed Thomas in his bedroom while I sat in the living room with another worker going through our daily routines. They inspected everything from our sleeping arrangements to the photos on the walls. Thomas kept crying for me, and I could hear him through the door saying, "I want my dad," over and over. Finally, they emerged and said Thomas had been very clear that I was his father and he felt safe and loved. They found no evidence of any inappropriate behavior. The worker actually apologized and said it was clear this was a malicious false report. I knew exactly who had made that call. The next day, I filed for a restraining order against Lisa and started documenting everything. But little did I know, I was late. Lisa had already started spreading rumors. The rumors spread through our neighborhood like wildfire. Within days, I noticed parents pulling their kids away when Thomas and I walked past. At the grocery store, people who'd smiled at us for years now avoided eye contact. The cashier who always asked about Thomas's baseball games suddenly became cold and efficient, scanning our items without a word. Thomas noticed too. He came home from school one afternoon with red eyes and wouldn't tell me what happened. I found out later from his teacher that some kids had started calling me names during recess. She'd intervened, but the damage was done. Thomas had gotten into his first fight defending me. I sat him down that night and tried to explain what was happening in terms a 10-year-old could understand. He just hugged me tighter and said he didn't care what anyone said, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. His world was changing, and there was nothing I could do to shield him from it. The next morning, I dropped Thomas off at school and noticed a group of mothers huddled near the entrance. They kept glancing my way and whispering. One of them, Sarah, whose son played on Thomas's baseball team, broke away from the group and marched toward me. "We need to talk," she said, crossing her arms. "Several of us have concerns about you coaching the team." My stomach dropped. I'd been coaching Thomas's little league team for 3 years. It was one of our favorite things to do together. "What concerns?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Given the recent allegations, we think it would be best if you stepped down for the children's safety." The words hit me like a punch. I wanted to scream that the allegations were false, that CPS had cleared me, that Lisa was manipulating everyone. Instead, I just nodded and walked back to my car. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. Lisa was systematically destroying our life, and she was winning. That afternoon, I got a call from the school principal. She wanted to meet with me about some anonymous reports they'd received. My heart sank. I knew exactly who was behind those reports. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. I spent the night going through all my documentation, printing emails, organizing the custody papers Lisa had signed. I barely slept, running through what I would say, how I would defend myself against invisible accusations. The principal, Mrs. Chen, had always been supportive of our situation, but when I walked into her office, her expression was guarded. She explained that multiple parents had expressed concerns about Thomas's well-being. Some claimed he seemed withdrawn. Others said they'd seen bruises from his fights. One report even suggested Thomas had confided in a classmate that he was afraid to go home. That's not true, I said, my voice cracking. You can ask Thomas yourself. He's happy. He's loved. These reports, they're all coming from— I can't discuss who made the reports, Mrs. Chen interrupted. But given the volume of concerns, we need to take action. Thomas will need to meet with the school counselor twice a week, and— she paused, looking uncomfortable. He's being suspended from extracurricular activities pending the counselor's assessment. You're taking him off the baseball team? I couldn't hide the anger in my voice. Do you know what that will do to him? Baseball is everything to him. It's temporary, she assured me, but I could see she was just following protocol. Once the counselor clears him, he can return to all activities. I left the office feeling defeated. How was I supposed to tell Thomas he couldn't play baseball? How could I explain that the woman who gave birth to him was destroying the life we'd built? That night, Thomas cried when I told him about the suspension. He didn't understand why he was being punished when he hadn't done anything wrong. I held him while he sobbed, promising we'd get through this together. But for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. The next few days were a blur of meetings and phone calls. I hired a family lawyer with money I didn't have, maxing out my credit card. She reviewed all my documentation and assured me my custody was solid, but warned that Lisa could make our lives difficult if she had resources. She's trying to build a case for reunification, the lawyer explained, creating doubt about your fitness as a parent, establishing herself in the community, showing maternal interest. It's calculated. Meanwhile, Lisa's social media campaign intensified. She posted old photos from when she was pregnant, writing long captions about the mistake she'd made and how she'd grown as a person. She shared articles about maternal bonds and second chances. Her posts got hundreds of sympathetic comments from strangers who didn't know the real story. Then she escalated again. One evening, Thomas was doing homework at the kitchen table when his tablet chimed. He'd gotten a message on the game he played with his friends, but when he opened it, his face went pale. "Dad," he said, his voice small. "There's a weird message." I looked at the screen. The message was from a new account. "Hi, Thomas. This is your real mom. I miss you so much. I have so many presents for you. Do you want to see pictures of your new room at my house?" My blood ran cold. I screenshotted everything and immediately called my lawyer. She said to document everything, but warned that without proof it was Lisa, there wasn't much we could do. The account had no identifying information. Over the next week, the messages continued. They started innocent enough, talking about toys and trips to amusement parks, but they gradually became more manipulative. "Your dad is keeping us apart. Don't you want to meet your stepdad? I have a big house with a pool." Thomas showed me every message, but I could see they were affecting him. He started asking questions about Lisa, about why she left, about whether she really was his mom. I answered honestly, but age-appropriately, trying not to poison him against her, while also protecting him from her manipulation. The counseling sessions at school seemed to be going well. The counselor, Mr. Rodriguez, told me Thomas was well-adjusted and clearly loved, but he also mentioned Thomas had been asking about his biological mother, showing confusion about the situation. I explained about the messages, but without concrete proof they came from Lisa, the school couldn't take action. One afternoon, I was walking to pick up Thomas when I noticed Lisa's Mercedes parked across from the school. She was just sitting there, watching the playground. I called the police, but she drove away before they arrived. The officer took my report, but explained that sitting in a public area wasn't illegal. That night, I installed security cameras around our apartment. I changed Thomas's tablet settings to block unknown messages. I felt like I was preparing for a siege. The next day, our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door. She'd always been friendly, bringing cookies for Thomas and chatting about her grandchildren, but her expression was different now. "I need to speak with you," she said, not waiting for an invitation before pushing past me. "That woman, Lisa, she came to see me. She told me things about you, about how you're keeping her son from her." My heart raced. "Mrs. Patterson, you've known us for years." "You know, I thought I knew," she interrupted. "But a mother separated from her child? That's not right." She showed me legal documents saying she's his biological mother. "She's offering to pay for him to go to private school, to give him opportunities you can't." "She abandoned him," I said firmly. "She signed away her rights. She left a baby with 2 teenagers and disappeared for 10 years. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. She said she was young and scared. "People make mistakes. And I was young too," I countered. "But I stayed. I raised him. I'm his father." She left without another word, but I could see Lisa's poison was working. She was turning our community against us, person by person. That weekend, I decided we needed a break. I took Thomas to our favorite hiking trail, hoping some time in nature would help us both clear our heads. He seemed lighter away from the neighborhood, laughing as we skipped stones in the creek. On the drive home, he was quiet. Then suddenly he asked, "Dad, what if she takes me away?" I pulled over, unable to drive with the weight of his fear. I turned to face him, seeing my own terror reflected in his eyes. "Listen to me," I said, taking his hands. "No one is taking you anywhere. You're my son. We have legal papers that say so. More importantly, we have 10 years of memories, of love, of being a family. That's stronger than anything." He nodded, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. Neither was I. When we got home, there was a notice taped to our door. Lisa had filed a petition with the court to revisit the custody arrangement. My lawyer had warned me this was coming, but seeing it in official legal language made it real. She was claiming I had manipulated her when she was young and vulnerable, that she'd been coerced into signing away her rights. I called my lawyer immediately. She reviewed the filing and said Lisa was throwing everything at the wall to see what what would stick. The accusations were vague, but designed to force a hearing where she could make her case publicly. The good news is, her case is weak, the lawyer said. The bad news is, she can drag this out and make your life miserable in the meantime. That night, I sat at my computer after Thomas went to bed, writing down everything I could remember from the past 10 years. Every birthday, every milestone, every sleepless night when he was sick. I uploaded photos, videos, report cards, medical records. I was building a case not just for custody, but for the truth of our relationship. The next morning, Thomas's counselor called. He was concerned about some things Thomas had said in their last session. Apparently, Thomas had mentioned being confused about why his real mom wanted him now when she didn't before. He was struggling with feelings of loyalty to me versus curiosity about Lisa. It's completely normal, Mr. Rodriguez assured me. But I think it would be helpful if Thomas could process these feelings with a therapist outside of school, someone who specializes in complex family dynamics. I agreed, even though I knew therapy would be another expense I couldn't afford. But Thomas's well-being was worth any cost. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of Thomas at school, taken from a distance. The caption read, "He looks just like me. Nature always wins over nurture." My hands trembled as I forwarded it to my lawyer. This was harassment, but proving it was Lisa would be another challenge. That afternoon, I was early to pick up Thomas, wanting to avoid any chance of running into Lisa. But as I waited by the gate, I noticed other parents giving me a wider berth than usual. One father I'd chatted with at baseball games actually moved his daughter to the other side of the yard when he saw me. When Thomas came out, he was subdued. His teacher followed him, asking to speak with me privately. She explained that Thomas had been distracted in class, and other students had been asking him about his two moms and dad. The situation was affecting his education. As we walked to the car, Thomas suddenly stopped. "Dad, I don't want to go to school anymore." My heart broke. School had always been his happy place. He loved learning, loved his friends. Lisa was poisoning that too. "We'll figure it out," I promised, though I had no idea how. That evening, as I was making dinner, there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw two people I didn't recognize. I opened the door cautiously. "Mr. Name? We're from Child Protective Services. We've received another report and need to conduct a follow-up investigation." My stomach churned as I stepped aside to let them in. The workers were different from last time, their faces stern and businesslike. Thomas heard their voices and came running from his room, immediately grabbing my hand when he saw the badges. "We need to conduct separate interviews again," the lead worker said. A woman with graying hair pulled back severely. "And we'll need to inspect the home more thoroughly this time." Thomas's grip tightened. I knelt down and told him everything would be okay, that these people just needed to ask some questions. But his eyes were wide with fear as they led him to his room. The other worker, a younger man with a clipboard, started asking me detailed questions about our daily routine, our finances, Thomas's medical history. Every answer I gave seemed to prompt 3 more questions. Through the walls, I could hear Thomas's voice, high and stressed, though I couldn't make out the words. 2 hours passed. The workers examined every corner of our apartment, taking photos, making notes. They checked the refrigerator, looked through Thomas's schoolwork, even inspected our bathroom for signs of neglect. Finally, they emerged from Thomas's room. "Your son seems very anxious," the woman said. "He mentioned someone has been contacting him online, claiming to be his mother. He also said kids at school have been saying things about you." I explained about Lisa, showed them the restraining order paperwork, the screenshots of the messages. They took copies of everything, but their expressions remained neutral. "We'll need to file our report," the man said. "Given that this is the second complaint in a short period, we may need to conduct follow-up visits." After they left, Thomas was quiet. He picked at his dinner, barely eating. When I tucked him in that night, he clung to me longer than usual. "They kept asking if I was happy," he whispered. "If you ever hurt me." I told them no, but they kept asking different ways. I smoothed his hair, fighting back my own tears. "You did great, buddy. You told the truth, and that's all that matters." The next morning, I kept Thomas home from school. He needed a break from the whispers and stares. We spent the day working on a model airplane, trying to pretend everything was normal, but I could see the worry in his eyes every time the phone rang. That afternoon, my lawyer called with bad news. The court had expedited Lisa's petition. The hearing was set for 3 weeks away. She explained that the multiple CPS reports, even though unsubstantiated, were working in Lisa's favor. "Judges take patterns seriously," she said. "Even if each individual report is cleared, the frequency suggests instability. You need character witnesses, people who can testify about your relationship with Thomas." I started making a list, but it was shorter than I'd hoped. So many people in our community had been poisoned by Lisa's rumors. The parents from the baseball team wouldn't return my calls. Even some of my coworkers had started acting strange after Lisa had shown up at my workplace, crying about her stolen son. That evening, I was helping Thomas with his homework when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Chen from the school. "I'm sorry to call so late," she said, "but I wanted to give you a heads up. We received a formal complaint from a parent about your presence on school grounds. Until this is resolved, you'll need to arrange for someone else to pick up and drop off Thomas." "You're banning me from the school?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's not a ban," she said carefully. "It's a temporary safety measure. You can designate another adult, or Thomas can take the bus." I hung up, feeling the walls closing in. How could I explain to Thomas that I couldn't even take him to school anymore? The next day, I arranged for Mrs. Patterson to walk Thomas to school, despite our recent tension. She agreed reluctantly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Thomas was confused and hurt, asking why I couldn't come with him. While he was at school, I drove to Jane's parents' house. I hadn't spoken to them in years, but I was desperate. Maybe they could provide some insight into Lisa's behavior, or even serve as character witnesses. Jane's mother, Catherine, answered the door. Her face went pale when she saw me. "We can't help you," she said immediately, starting to close the door. "Please," I begged. "This is about Thomas. Lisa is trying to take him." Catherine hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Lisa has been very generous to us," she said quietly. "After Jane left, after we failed to help with Thomas, Lisa started sending money, helping with our mortgage. The pieces clicked into place. She's been paying you to stay quiet. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. We needed the help, my husband's medical bills, but we never thought she'd come back for him. We thought she was just easing her guilt. You could tell the truth, I said. Tell the court how she abandoned him, how she's been planning this. We can't, Catherine whispered. She has emails, texts, where we thanked her for the money, where we agreed to not interfere. She said if we speak against her, she'll say we sold our grandson. I left their house feeling more alone than ever. Lisa had been planning this for years, building her case while I'd just been trying to survive day to day. When I picked up Thomas from Mrs. Patterson's that afternoon, he was upset. Kids at school had been asking why I wasn't allowed there anymore. One boy said his mom told him I was dangerous. That night, I found Thomas in his room, packing his backpack. What are you doing, buddy? He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Maybe if I go with her, everyone will stop being mean to you. I pulled him into my arms, my heart shattering. No, Thomas. We don't give up on family. We stick together, no matter what. But even as I said it, I wondered how much more he could take. The harassment escalated over the next few days. Our tires were slashed overnight. Someone spray-painted Predator on our apartment door. The security cameras I'd installed caught figures in hoodies, but their faces were obscured. I filed police reports, but without clear identification, there was nothing they could do. The apartment manager gave me a warning about the vandalism, saying other tenants were complaining. Then came the call that changed everything. It was from Thomas's therapist, Dr. Catherine Reeves, whom we'd seen twice. I'm concerned about something Thomas said in our session today, she said. He mentioned that someone named Lisa has been promising him a better life. He seems very conflicted. She's been manipulating him, I explained. She's his biological mother who abandoned him. I understand, Dr. Reeves said. But Thomas also expressed some concerning thoughts. He said he sometimes wonders if everyone would be happier if he wasn't around. My blood ran cold. He said that? Not in those exact words, but the sentiment was clear. I think the stress of this situation is taking a serious toll on him. Have you thought about what might be best for Thomas in the long term? Living with me is what's best for him, I said firmly. Of course, she said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Another professional Lisa had gotten to. That night, I sat outside Thomas's room, listening to him breathe as he slept. How had it come to this? How had Lisa managed to turn our entire world against us in just a few weeks? The next morning, Thomas didn't want to get out of bed. He complained of a stomachache, but I knew it was more than that. I let him stay home again, calling in sick to my own job. My boss was losing patience with my absences, but I couldn't leave Thomas alone. We were eating lunch when there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a suit holding a briefcase. Process server, he announced when I opened the door. You're being served with a civil suit. I took the papers with shaking hands. Lisa was suing me for emotional damages, claiming I had alienated her from her son and caused her years of pain and suffering. The amount she was seeking would bankrupt me. Thomas watched from the hallway. What is it, Dad? Just paperwork, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing to worry about, but he knew I was lying. He always knew. That afternoon, while Thomas played video games, I called my lawyer. She reviewed the civil suit and sighed heavily. This is a tactic, she said. She's trying to drain your resources before the custody hearing. You'll need to respond, which means more legal fees. I don't have more money, I admitted. There might be legal aid options, she said, but honestly, Lisa seems to have unlimited resources. She's playing a long game. After I hung up, I found Thomas standing in the doorway. Are we going to lose our home? He asked quietly. I wanted to lie, to protect him, but he deserved honesty. I don't know, buddy, but whatever happens, we'll face it together. That evening, I was making dinner when Thomas's tablet chimed. He'd been so good about showing me messages, but this time he hesitated. What is it? I asked. He handed me the tablet reluctantly. The message was from a different account. Your dad is going to lose. He doesn't have the money to fight me, but you don't have to suffer. Come live with me and I'll make all this stop. I'll make sure he doesn't get in trouble. I screenshotted it immediately, but I could see the damage was done. Thomas looked torn, confused by the manipulation. She's lying, I told him. This isn't your fault, and you're not responsible for fixing it. But I could see him withdrawing, carrying a burden no 10-year-old should have to bear. The next few days blurred together. More CPS visits, more police reports for vandalism, more messages to Thomas that grew increasingly manipulative. Lisa was everywhere and nowhere, orchestrating our destruction from the shadows. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, everything exploded. I had sent Thomas to school with Mrs. Patterson, planning to use the day to meet with legal aid lawyers, but 2 hours later, I got a frantic call from the school. Thomas is missing, Mrs. Chen said, her voice shaking. He was in class, went to the bathroom, and never came back. We've searched the entire building. My world tilted. I raced to the school, my heart pounding. Police were already there, questioning teachers and searching the grounds. When did you last see him? An officer asked. This morning, I said, my voice cracking. He was fine. He was. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He's safe. He came to me. Don't worry. I'm taking good care of my son. I showed the police immediately. They traced the number, but it led to a burner phone. An Amber Alert was issued. Lisa's photo distributed. But she had planned well. The next 8 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in the police station, answering questions, providing photos, praying for any news. The detectives were kind, but honest. If Lisa had taken him out of state, it would be harder to track them. Then, around 10 p.m., Thomas called my phone. Dad? His voice was small, scared. Thomas, where are you? Are you okay? I'm at a hotel. She said we were just going for ice cream, but then she kept driving. Dad, I want to come home. I'm coming to get you, I said. Can you tell me what you see? But then I heard Lisa's voice in the background, and the line went dead. The police traced the call to a hotel 2 hours away. By the time they arrived, Lisa and Thomas were gone. But the hotel had security footage, clear evidence of Lisa taking Thomas without permission. This changes everything, my lawyer said when I called her. Kidnapping, crossing state lines, she's destroyed any chance at custody. But I didn't care about legal victories. I just wanted Thomas home. The next morning, Lisa called from another burner phone. I'm bringing him back, she said, sounding exhausted. He won't stop crying for you. This isn't how I thought it would be. Where? I asked. The school. 1 hour. Come alone. I immediately called the police, but they advised against against going alone. We compromised. They would stay out of sight unless needed. I arrived at the school to find Lisa's Mercedes in the parking lot. Thomas was in the back seat, and when he saw me, he started sobbing. Lisa got out, looking haggard, nothing like the polished woman who'd started this war. "He doesn't even know me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He spent the whole time talking about you, showing me pictures on his tablet of your life together. Every story was about you." Thomas scrambled out of the car and ran to me. I held him tight, feeling his small body shake with sobs. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "She said if I went with her, she'd stop hurting you. She said she'd make everyone be nice to you again." "It's not your fault," I told him. "None of this is your fault." Lisa stood there, watching us, something breaking in her expression. I thought he'd love me once he got to know me. I thought nature would win. The police moved in then, placing her under arrest. She didn't resist, just kept staring at Thomas, clinging to me. "I'm his mother," she said quietly as they cuffed her. "No," Thomas said, his voice stronger than I'd heard in weeks. "You're not. You're just someone who left. He's my dad." He stayed. As the police car drove away with Lisa, I held Thomas in the school parking lot, both of us crying with relief. We had survived, but the scars would take time to heal. The next days were a whirlwind of police interviews, court appearances, and therapy sessions. Lisa was charged with custodial interference and kidnapping. Her husband, apparently unaware of her actions, filed for divorce and offered to testify about her obsessive behavior. Slowly, the truth spread through our community. The parents who had shunned us began reaching out with apologies. Mrs. Patterson brought over a casserole and cried on our doorstep. The school lifted all restrictions, and Mrs. Chen personally apologized. But the damage was real. Thomas had nightmares, afraid Lisa would come back. He became clingy, anxious when I was out of sight. We increased his therapy sessions, working through the trauma together. A week later, we had an unexpected visitor. Jane stood at our door, looking older, tired, but familiar. "I heard what happened," she said. "My parents called. First, I came as soon as I could." Thomas hid behind me, unsure about this new development. "I'm not here to disrupt your life," Jane said quickly. "I know I gave up any right to that, but I thought maybe I could help. Testify about Lisa, about how she manipulated everyone." I was wary, but Thomas surprised me by stepping forward slightly. "Are you going to leave again?" he asked bluntly. Jane's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not asking to be part of your life. I know I don't deserve that, but I want to help make this right, to help stop Lisa from hurting you anymore." Over the next weeks, Jane stayed in town, true to her word. She testified in court about Lisa's manipulation, her abandonment, her pattern of using people. She didn't ask for anything from Thomas, didn't try to insert herself into our lives. She just helped. The custody hearing became a criminal trial instead. With the kidnapping charges and mounting evidence of harassment, Lisa's case crumbled. She was sentenced to probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment. A permanent restraining order was put in place. Jane prepared to leave after the trial, but Thomas stopped her. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe you could visit sometimes, if you promise not to leave without saying goodbye." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The weeks after the trial were harder than I expected. Thomas jumped at every knock on the door, convinced Lisa would somehow appear despite the restraining order. I caught him checking the locks on windows before bed, something he'd never done before. The school counselor increased their sessions to 3 times a week. One afternoon, I arrived at Mrs. Patterson's to pick up Thomas and found him sitting on her porch steps, backpack beside him. His eyes were red-rimmed. Mrs. Patterson emerged, looking concerned. She explained that Thomas had refused to go inside after school, insisting on waiting outside where he could see the street. He'd been watching every car that passed, flinching whenever a Mercedes drove by. That night, Thomas asked if we could move, somewhere far away where nobody knew about Lisa or what had happened. I understood the impulse, but our entire life was here. My jobs, his school, the few friends who'd stood by us. The next morning brought another challenge. My boss called me into his office. He'd been patient during the crisis, but my absences had become a problem. He needed reliability, and with Thomas's ongoing needs, I couldn't promise that. He gave me 2 weeks to figure out a solution or find another job. I spent that evening scrolling through job listings while Thomas did homework. Everything either paid less or required hours I couldn't work. Single parenting had always been a juggling act, but now it felt impossible. Thomas must have sensed my stress because he suddenly closed his textbook and came to sit beside me on the couch. He didn't say anything, just leaned against my shoulder. We sat like that for a while, both of us trying to pretend things were normal. The following week, Jane called. She'd been staying at a motel across town since the trial, keeping her promise not to intrude. But she had a proposition. She explained that she'd been working remotely for a tech company and had saved a decent amount. She wanted to help with Thomas's therapy costs, not as his mother, she emphasized, but as someone who owed us both a debt she could never fully repay. I was torn. We needed the help desperately, but accepting money from Jane felt like opening a door I wasn't sure we were ready for. I told her I'd think about it. That night, I mentioned Jane's offer to Thomas. His reaction surprised me. He said if she wanted to help pay for his therapy, that was okay, but he didn't want to see her yet. Maybe someday, but not now. I called Jane back and accepted her offer, with clear boundaries. She could help with the therapy bills, but there would be no visits, no attempts at building a relationship unless Thomas initiated it. She agreed immediately. The therapy sessions were helping, slowly. Dr. Reeves worked with Thomas on processing his confusion about Lisa, his guilt over going with her, his fear that she'd return. Some days were better than others. One session, Thomas drew a picture of our family. It was just the 2 of us, standing in front of our apartment, but he'd drawn a thick black border around us, like a fortress. When Dr. Reeves asked about it, Thomas said it was to keep the bad people out. Meanwhile, I was struggling to find a new job that would work with our schedule. Most employers weren't interested in someone who might need to leave suddenly for school emergencies or therapy appointments. My savings were dwindling fast. Then Mrs. Patterson surprised us. She showed up one evening with a proposal. Her daughter ran a small online business and needed help with inventory and shipping. The hours were flexible, and I could work from home when needed. The pay wasn't great, but it was something. I started the next week, grateful for the lifeline. Thomas would would do his homework at the kitchen table while I packed orders in the living room. It wasn't ideal, but we were together, and that's what mattered. The community's attitude had shifted dramatically after Lisa's arrest made the local news. Parents who'd avoided us now made efforts to include Thomas in playdates and birthday parties, but Thomas wasn't ready. He'd become withdrawn, preferring to stay home rather than risk uncomfortable questions from other kids. His teacher called one afternoon, concerned about his isolation. Thomas was doing well academically, but wouldn't participate in group activities. He ate lunch alone, spent recess in the library. She suggested maybe getting him involved in something outside school, something fresh where nobody knew our story. I found a youth art program at the community center 2 towns over. Thomas was hesitant at first, but the instructor was warm and understanding. She didn't pry when Thomas was quiet, just gave him space to create. Slowly, he began to open up there. He made a friend, a quiet kid named Marcus, who was dealing with his own family troubles. They bonded over their shared love of drawing and their mutual understanding that sometimes families were complicated. One evening, Thomas came home from art class with the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. He'd won a small award for one of his paintings. It wasn't much, just a certificate and a ribbon, but he was proud. We framed it and hung it in his room. The financial pressure was still intense. Even with Jane's help covering therapy and my new job, we were barely making ends meet. I sold my car, relying on public transportation and Mrs. Patterson's kindness for Thomas's school runs. Then came an unexpected development. Lisa's ex-husband reached out through my lawyer. He felt terrible about what had happened and wanted to make amends. He couldn't undo Lisa's actions, but he could offer something concrete. He owned several rental properties and had a small 2-bedroom house sitting empty. He offered it to us at half the market rate. I was suspicious at first. Why would he help us? But my lawyer assured me it was legitimate. The man genuinely felt guilty about unknowingly enabling Lisa's obsession. He'd discovered she'd been planning her return for years, keeping detailed files about us, hiring private investigators. He wanted to do something positive. Thomas was anxious about moving, even just across town. But when we visited the house, something shifted. It had a small backyard, something we'd never had. Thomas immediately started talking about maybe getting a dog someday. We moved on a Saturday. Mrs. Patterson helped, along with a few parents from Thomas's art class who'd heard our story. It was strange accepting help from people who'd once shunned us, but I was learning that pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. That first night in the new house, Thomas had a panic attack. He was convinced Lisa would find us, that she'd somehow gotten our new address. I sat with him on his bedroom floor, reminding him about the restraining order, the monitoring anklet she had to wear, all the protections in place. Eventually, he calmed down enough to sleep. I stayed in his doorway for hours, watching him breathe, ready to reassure him if he woke. The next few weeks were about establishing new routines. Thomas started taking the bus to school, which gave him a sense of independence. I worked during school hours, then picked him up from art class in the evenings. Slowly, very slowly, we found a rhythm. One afternoon, Thomas asked if we could get a security system for the house. Not because he thought Lisa would come, he said, but because it would help him sleep better. We installed basic door alarms and a camera for the front entrance. It wasn't much, but Thomas visibly relaxed afterward. His therapy sessions were showing progress. Dr. Reeves said Thomas was processing his trauma well, learning to separate his fear from reality. He still had bad days, but they were becoming less frequent. Then Jane called again. She'd been seeing her own therapist, working through her guilt and failures. She wasn't asking to see Thomas, she emphasized. She just wanted me to know she was getting help, trying to understand why she'd run all those years ago. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry at her for leaving, for making me do this alone, but another part understood that she'd been just a scared kid too. I told her I was glad she was getting help and hung up. Thomas must have overheard because he asked about it at dinner. I explained honestly that Jane was in therapy, working on herself. He nodded thoughtfully, but didn't say anything more. A month into the new house, Thomas made another friend at art class, a girl named Sophia who loved painting landscapes. They started working on a project together, and Thomas actually asked if she could come over to work on it at our house. It was a small thing, but huge for us. Thomas was letting someone into our space, trusting again. Sophia's mom dropped her off, and I could see her taking in our modest home, clearly having heard some version of our story. But she was kind, saying she was glad Thomas had found such a good friend in her daughter. The kids worked on their project in the backyard while I made snacks. I heard Thomas actually laughing, explaining some technique he'd learned. It was the most normal he'd sounded in months. That weekend, we went to the animal shelter. Thomas had been researching dogs obsessively, reading about different breeds and their temperaments. He was drawn to a medium-sized mutt with anxious eyes who cowered in the back of his kennel. The shelter worker explained the dog had been through multiple homes, each return making him more skittish. Thomas sat on the floor of the visiting room, letting the dog approach at his own pace. When the dog finally crept forward to sniff his hand, Thomas looked up at me with tears in his eyes. We brought the dog home that day. Thomas named him Buddy, and they were inseparable from the start. Buddy slept on Thomas's bed, followed him around the house, and seemed to sense when Thomas was anxious, pressing close against his leg. The first time Thomas had a nightmare in the new house, Buddy was there before I was, licking his face and whimpering until Thomas woke up. After that, the nightmares became less frequent. Work was going better. Mrs. Patterson's daughter was impressed with my organization and offered me more hours. It still wasn't much, but combined with careful budgeting, we were stable. Thomas didn't have everything other kids had, but he had what he needed. One evening, while walking Buddy, we ran into one of Thomas's old baseball teammates. The boy excitedly told Thomas about the team's recent games, how they missed him at practice. Thomas listened politely, but didn't engage much. After the boy left, Thomas said maybe next year he'd think about playing again. Maybe. The seasons changed. Thomas's art improved dramatically. His teacher suggested entering him in a regional youth art competition. Thomas was hesitant, worried about the attention it might bring, but eventually agreed. The day of the competition, I watched him set set up his pieces with steady hands. He'd grown in these months, becoming more confident in spaces where our story wasn't known. When they announced he'd won third place in his age group, his smile was radiant. Jane sent a card congratulating him. Thomas stared at it for a long time before putting it in his desk drawer. Not thrown away, but not displayed either. Progress, in its own way. As winter approached, we settled into our new normal. Thomas went to school, art class, therapy. I worked, managed the house, walked Buddy. It wasn't the life I'd imagined at 18, but it was ours. One night, as I tucked Thomas in, he said something that stopped me cold. He said he was glad Lisa had tried to take him, not because of what happened, but because it showed him what really mattered. He knew now that I'd fight for him, that our family was real, even if it didn't look like others. I didn't trust myself to speak, just hugged him tighter. Buddy wedged himself between us, tail wagging, completing our little unit. The court date for Lisa's probation review was approaching. My lawyer said she'd been complying with all requirements, attending mandatory therapy, staying away from us. There was talk of her moving out of state when her probation ended, starting fresh somewhere else. Thomas said he didn't care where she went as long as she stayed away, but I could see him tense whenever the mail arrived, still worried about unexpected contact. Then came a surprise. My old boss called. They'd had trouble filling my position and wondered if I'd consider returning part-time, with flexible hours. The pay was better than what I was making, and they understood my situation now. I discussed it with Thomas. He was worried about changes to our routine, but understood we needed the money. We agreed I'd try it for a month and see how it went. The first day back was strange. Some co-workers were overly friendly, clearly feeling guilty about their earlier judgment. Others maintained professional distance, but the work was familiar, and the steady paycheck would help enormously. Thomas started spending afternoons at Mrs. Patterson's again when needed. She'd become like a grandmother to him, and Buddy was always welcome. Sometimes I'd find them all in her living room, Thomas doing homework while Mrs. Patterson knitted and Buddy dozed at their feet. One afternoon, Thomas came home from therapy with a request. He wanted to write a letter to Jane, not to reconnect, but to say some things he needed to say. Dr. Reeves thought it might help with closure. He worked on that letter for days, writing and rewriting. I didn't read it, respecting his privacy. When he finally sealed the envelope, he asked me to mail it. Jane texted me a week later, just saying she'd received it and would honor whatever Thomas needed. Spring arrived with tentative hope. Thomas rejoined one after-school activity, a science club that met weekly. He was cautious about making friends, but slowly opened up to a few kids who shared his interests. The art program announced their annual showcase. Parents and community members would view the students' work. Thomas was nervous about the exposure, but excited to display his progress. The night of the showcase, I watched Thomas explain his paintings to visitors. He stood taller now, spoke clearer. When someone asked about the recurring theme of boundaries in his work, he simply said art helped him process things. No details, no oversharing, just quiet confidence. As we drove home, Thomas said he'd been thinking about high school. It was still a couple of years away, but he wanted to attend the Arts Magnet program across town. It would mean longer commutes, but he was ready to invest in his future. That night, I found myself planning beyond next week for the first time in months. Thomas was healing. We were stable. The future, while uncertain, no longer felt like something to survive, but something to build toward. Lisa's probation ended without incident. She moved to another state, according to my lawyer. No forwarding address, no attempts at contact, just gone, finally. Thomas received the news with relief, but also something else. Closure, maybe. He said he hoped she got help, that she found whatever she was looking for. But he was done wondering about her. Summer meant more art classes, day camps when I could afford them, long walks with Buddy. Thomas made friends with kids in the neighborhood, cautiously, but genuinely. Our house became the occasional hangout spot, kids working on art projects in the backyard while I worked inside. One evening, as I watched Thomas teaching Buddy a new trick while his friends cheered them on, I realized we'd made it. Not to some perfect ending, but to a place of stability and hope. We'd survived the worst and built something new from the pieces. Thomas caught me watching and grinned. The carefree expression of a kid who knew he was loved and safe. That was enough. More than enough. We still had therapy appointments, bills to pay, hard days when the past felt too close. But we had each other and Buddy and a community we'd slowly rebuilt. Thomas was thriving in his own quiet way, and I was learning to forgive myself for not being perfect, just present. As summer turned to fall, Thomas started 7th grade with cautious optimism. He joined the art club immediately and even considered trying out for the school play's set design team. Small steps, but forward ones. I kept Jane updated through occasional texts, just basics about Thomas's progress. She always responded with gratitude and respect for our boundaries. Maybe someday Thomas would want more, but that was his choice to make when ready. Our life wasn't what anyone would have planned, but watching Thomas head off to school that morning, backpack bouncing, turning to wave at me and Buddy in the doorway, I knew we'd found our way. Different from others, marked by challenges, but ours. Completely, unquestionably ours.